We have a special guest who I will let Nisha introduce, and they're going to present on speech and language disability. And I'll just flag that the agenda that I sent out had a bunch of resources linked and attached for further edification on this issue. Thanks, Nisha. And welcome, Chris.
Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to introduce Chris, and I'm trying to find a way that I can be So we're going to do an interview process, and I'll set the stage first about disabilities, and then hone in on speech and language disabilities. So, and then I'm going to introduce Chris to everyone. So, disability is very large and deep. The World Health Organization, for example, has 1 out of 5 people globally have disabilities. And that ranges from physical disabilities, like people who wear a wheelchair, people who have who are blind or low vision, mental disability, development disability. It's a huge range of concepts. And if disability in general is not known to most people, especially non-disabled people, then speech disability and language disability is really not known. And so I'm very pleased to have Chris from the New York to speak on speech disabilities. So welcome, Chris.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for that introduction, Nisha, for inviting me, and really to everyone, it's just really a pleasure to be here this morning and talk to you all about speech disabilities, stuttering. So I guess maybe. It's just a little bit of my formal title. So I work for New York lawyers for the public interest in New York City, which you may have guessed by the name. And I am a staff attorney in the Disability Justice Program here. And so I maybe just to back up, when I introduced myself and said good morning, I stuttered quite a lot to begin, and that's sort of a self-advocacy kind of way of putting it out to the listener that I am a person with a speech disability. Oftentimes, I'll also say, I'll actually say, I'm a person who stutters, and what that means is that when I speak, I'll repeat myself or block sometimes, and so keep that in mind while I'm talking. And all of these are sort of different sort of techniques to kind of advocate for myself, because as Nisha was just really astutely pointing out, speech disability is one of the lesser, I think, understood and perhaps accommodated forms of disability, and so it's a big part of success with being a person with speech disabilities is at this point self-advocacy.
Great. So, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about your work and what you do?
Yeah, great. Absolutely. So, I work at New York lawyers for the public interest, NYLPI for short. NYLPI has been around for almost 50 years, and in short, kind of what we do is we use this community lawyering model, which we're staffed up with attorneys, and we recognize that sometimes the challenge in practicing law is actually responding to needs of the community, whatever that community may be. In our case, it's the disability community. So we basically meet and keep relationships open with people with disabilities, and kind of attend meetings and go to government hearings and things like that, to kind of to learn what the most pressing issues are with the disability community, and then we let that kind of dictate where our legal practice goes. So at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, we focus on kind of broadly through three areas: disability justice, environmental justice, and health justice, which includes our immigration work as well. But I am in the disability justice program.
And do you like the staff? How is that, like the staff culture?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Nisha. So yes, I really do. I was actually just talking to a couple of friends of mine recently, and we were just kind of talking about what stuttering feels like in different environments. And one of the things that we said is that safety sort of has a big impact on what it feels like to be a person who stutters. And and some people were saying, well, I feel safe around friends or around family. And I said, truthfully, that my place of employment has actually kind of increasingly become a place of safety for me to be open about being a person who stutters. So that's really very meaningful, and I would say that NYLPI has kind of encouraged me to be very open about stuttering, and to kind of speak with my authentic voice, which is stuttered speech, and I've kind of been working to use that as an asset to kind of bridge the gap to other people with disabilities, mobility disabilities, or hearing disabilities, or intellectual disabilities, whatever the case may be. We're all under this large umbrella of disability, and I believe that by being very open with mine, it somewhat gives me a ticket into the room of other disabilities as well.
Great. And so how would you compare NYLPI with your previous job?
Yeah, so that's before I worked at NYLPI, I was at a private law firm for many years, and we worked in class action work, and it was kind of a very sort of traditional kind of, you might think of a law firm, kind of a big office high up in the sky type of thing, and I really felt very unsafe when it came to my disability. In that office, I really felt that it was very important for me to blend in, and to not sound different from anyone else. And being a person with a speech disability, that's basically impossible. And so what I often did was I just kind of really stayed very quiet most of the time, and that limited what I could do as a practicing attorney in that workplace. And so it was a hard place to work, because I really wanted to kind of be an effective advocate for people, and yet I was kind of feeling very constrained.
Great. And so why don't you tell us more about speech disability, and particularly with stuttering? What does that mean?
Yeah, so stuttering, kind of to give maybe some facts about it, some fun facts. There are about 1% of the population are people who stutter. In the U.S. alone, that means about 3 million people. So men are 4 times more likely to be people who stutter than women. So many people who stutter start in early childhood, and about 75% of those people who stutter, they grow out of it, perhaps through therapy intervention, sometime early in their childhood, by around 5 or 6. And for those that don't grow out of it by that age, for the most part, it's set through their adulthood. So that's kind of a little background on stuttering.
Great. And what is it like to be a person who stutters in the workplace, either in NYLPI or other organizations? And what is the biases, the other ways that may impact you or others?
Yeah, thank you, Nisha. So I would say that I think I would like to kind of expand a bit from my own experience and to kind of discuss what I've gathered from friends of mine who stutter, and just kind of being aware of the community. And that is that it's quite challenging being a person with a speech disability in the workplace. You know, so Nisha was giving a bit of kind of background on disability. You know, disability, the disability kind of began kind of in a civil rights sense, came into the consciousness kind of in the 60s and 70s, and kind of moved forward to when the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in the 90s. And it's so disability is becoming more and more protected and accepted, at least in the United States. But speech is kind of often forgotten about, or sort of people don't quite know where to put it in the world of disability, even though it is generally recognized as a disability. So what that can kind of lead to is that there are persistent biases and stigmas that affect people who stutter and people with speech disabilities, and what that can lead to is that there are statistics about people who stutter are kind of underemployed than their peers who do not stutter, even with the same education levels and things like that. And so it's a huge problem. And you know, I think it's just I think so much of it comes down to a big part of it is self-advocacy, knowing how to talk about being a person with a speech disability, making people aware of it, because what I think a lot of people who stutter deal with is that they feel this intense external pressure to fit in, and what that often leads to is that they sort of feel stifled and don't share their stories, don't really fully share their ideas about things. And you know, it's hard to be effective in most areas of your life when you're feeling this pressure to sort of to kind of balance a lot of different interests, including remaining quiet.
So what do you do, Chris, with personal and work advocacy on disabilities?
Yeah, so thank you. So I mean, I sometimes refer to being kind of open as a person who stutters as I came out at some point. So I'm 38, and I kind of came out like around in my late 20s, And so before that time, I was what I was a covert stutterer. What that is just really somebody who's just really trying to hide it the best they can. And around when I finished law school and I was in the profession for a while, I really was like, I am not advancing. This is becoming really painful to know that I can do so much more, but I'm letting something limit me. And so I really, I did a number of things. One of the things was I connected with other people who stutter here in New York City, and I began kind of learning their stories and how they were dealing with things, what their struggles were, and I started learning that we had so many similarities and challenges. And so this group of people that I would meet with, we began kind of like expressing ideas about how to improve the world for people who stutter. And so we go into just advocacy and kind of accepting that the way I speak is okay, and that the world is not familiar with it, and that it's partially my job to be open. So I've been on podcasts, and I've written kind of articles about stuttering, and I've testified at different hearings, but I really think that the biggest thing is just to represent stuttering in every area that I go into, and just kind of we often talk about you hear about celebrities who stutter or recover from stuttering, and sometimes they'll show up at galas and events and be like, yeah, I recovered, but good luck to all the rest of you. And we kind of I feel like what people need is to hear stuttering and to see people stutter. And so that's what I really try to bring.
Great. Thank you, Chris. So now we're going to switch, and Chris is going to interview me.
So thank you, Nisha. So I'll put the interviewer hat on. So Nisha, you have a speech disability as well. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I have a mobility. I have a cane, but I also have aphasia, which is a language disorder that affects a person's ability to communicate. And so the story is that in 2017, I was having seizures. So I did a lot of public speaking. I did it frequently and to large groups of people. And I had seizures. And so I went to the doctor and I found out that I had brain cancer. And then a year after that, I had the seizure started to come back. And at that time, I didn't tell anybody my cancer. And then the second time, I went to get surgeries as well. And during the operating room stroke, I got stroke. And so that's the reason I had to be disclosed my disability on aphasia. And that's how I got to know about disability. I'm later in life that I have that.
And can you tell us maybe a bit more about what the impact of aphasia has been for you?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. As I mentioned, I public spoke a lot, and I was a fantastic public speaker. I didn't even have to prepare. It was like natural for me. And I did it very, very clear and very natural. Now I'm so much more nervous on presentations, and so much time to prepare and all of that stuff. And you compare that when I first started, I couldn't walk, talk, or do anything when I initially had stroke. So that the growth has been positive in the sense that I have now, I'm speaking to this group of people here, but that is a change. And another positive framing for all of this is the brain itself. So a portion of my brain was destroyed by stroke, but the early stage was very hard. Like I would see my partner's name and I couldn't spell the name because I just didn't understand it. And now I'm like able to read and write and do a range of things over time. And you realize that like hearing versus speaking versus thinking versus writing versus one-on-one conversations versus public speaking to a large audience are very different, and your brain is very malleable. So it's only like all of us, the community, don't understand only a tiny iota of our brain and the understanding of our brain. And I think that's really blows my mind how we do that. Great. So we have a few minutes. We're happy to answer questions with all of you or share more. Amma.
Thank you, Nisha and Chris. I found this really helpful and informative and brave. So really appreciate you all being here. Chris talked a lot about self-advocacy, and I'm wondering if there are things that colleagues who are able-bodied can do to support either of you that you found helpful.
Chris, go ahead.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Amma, for the question. Colleagues and others are important allies, and what allies can do, really is to listen. You listen, and you do not. I guess maybe to start with, first thing is to talk about it. To not be. It can be awkward talking about disability and uncomfortable to raise questions, but that sort of furthers like stigmas and biases that are entrenched, and by talking about it, it kind of dismantles some of it. So to be open to talk about it, and then some tips for talking with people who stutter is that generally people who stutter don't want you to finish their sentences. So when they're stuck on something, just be patient and keep eye contact the way you would with anybody else, and wait for them to get the word out that they're struggling with. When people finish my sentences, what I usually do is I continue. Like I can feel that I'm stuttering. I know what I want to say. There's some kind of a mechanical block between my brain to my mouth, and it's not a matter of not knowing what I want to say. It's just not coming out, but it will eventually. And so when people finish my sentences, I'll often just continue on with what I was saying, and I'll still finish them. So listening, you'll finish sentences, things like that. Very important.
Yeah, and I would as Chris mentioned, just asking questions. Like both me and Chris are very happy to talk about speech disability. There's other communities, other people who don't want to discuss that. So take that cue as well if people don't want to talk about it. But from our perspective and other that we know in the community, they want to talk and discuss it so that you can spread that knowledge to others. Becca, did you have a question?
Yeah, Nisha, I was curious whether you also prefer for people, like when you're searching for a word. My mom has aphasia, and she likes when folks jump in and help her out, so I imagine it's like a matter of personal preference. But I was just curious what your feeling was, so that. we can
Yeah, I prefer like I think often I'll like have the same thing. My brain has the word and like the voice wasn't, and I prefer to wait for me to speak and then have other people talk. But I also think that often the wording may not be exactly correct and people may not understand what I've said. So I'd really like to people to say, I didn't understand that. Can you repeat that? And if I can't repeat it by voice, I can email it or I can like talk to people so that it's like my brain is like clear when I make out the sounds.
Thank you. Helpful for me to know.
Any other questions?
Maybe I can just add to Becca to what you asked. It's such an important question because I mean I don't want to generalize the experience of disability. I think like the fundamental sort of premise is that disability is different for everybody that has them, and so as Nisha was saying, kind of ask questions about it. Kind of intuit whether somebody wants to talk about it, how open they are, and all that. But I think just one of the biggest risks is just ignoring it is part of the problem.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chris, for the guest speaker. And thank you to all for hearing that.